are live on Facebook and we are recording so we can put this on YouTube later. So welcome again. And we're excited to have Judy up again in the middle of the night from Israel to share with us more in detail from the Torrents of Spring. And I think we had a really great initial discussion last week with Chris showing us some of the sites in Michigan, which are featured in the book. I think that was very enlightening for a lot of us. And then hopefully everyone had their 90-page reading assignment from last week for this novella. And Judy, I'm going to just pass it on to you and let you run the show tonight.
Wonderful. Well, good evening to everyone. To me, it's a very, very early good morning. It's 2 a.m. here in sunny Israel, and so happy to have you on board. I really want to make this accessible to all of you, and I thought I'd actually ask you if you want me to give my presentation first, or if you'd like to ask some questions or have some answers to the questions, the homework that I gave you. So this is totally up to you, what you're feeling. For instance, I suggested that you take a look at the contrasts between the characters, and suggested that you also, here's my very worn copy. You can see with all of my, you can even see that it says on it, work copy, whereas behind me, I have my very treasured copy, which I will show you a little bit later. And you can see here also the 3 books that I feel are highly influential, which are Joseph Andrews by Henry Fielding, The Torrents of Spring by Ivan Turgeniev, and Sherwood Anderson's Dark Laughter. Again, you can see in all these cases, these are books that I used extensively and had millions of notes for myself to find when I needed them. The funny thing is that I finished my, I finished my dissertation nearly 20 years ago. And after about 5 years, I said, oh, I don't need all this material. I have all these millions of articles and cards and everything. And one day I just went and took 2 big piles and put them into the recycling bin. And when I started 2 months ago on this amazing journey, I said, oh, why did I throw it all away? But okay. So first of all, does anybody have a burning question that he absolutely has to have answered right this second? Or should I launch into the presentation? What do you say? What say you? Questions to begin with? You can unmute yourselves and ask away. If there are and aren't any, then I shall launch into my presentation. Please feel free to stop me at any time and ask a question, and I will endeavor to answer you. I also gave you last time my email, and I will give it again at the end, and you are more than welcome to reach out on the email and ask me questions. So I will turn to my presentation, which I'm not sure that you just got there because I didn't do share screen. And here we go. Share screen. And we do want to put this up so that everyone can see the slideshow. Perfect. Wonderful. Okay. Without any apologies, really, The Torrents of Spring. I'd like to look first at the original. This is the illustration that was put up by Boni and Liveright when Torrents of Spring was first published in 1926. And we can see here Yogi Johnson, who is rather reluctantly looking on to people in the middle of life. And we can see we're obviously in Brown's Beanery here. We see Mandy, the young waitress, who is very sassy. And I think the illustrator did a really great job of capturing what is going on. Scripps, of course, who is engaged with her, and poor Diana with her literary journal. And here is the bird in the cage.
Real quick, Judy, is everyone seeing the presentation?
Can everyone see the presentation? Is there someone who can't? If you can't, unmute yourself.
Yep, looks like we've got it now. The person who couldn't see it can see it now, so we are all set.
Wonderful, perfect. So here we go. Okay, I did, as I did say a moment ago, in my opinion, my humble opinion, after doing a number of years of research, I came up with three major influences on Ernest Hemingway's The Torrents of Spring. And I see them as, here, we'll do them in chronological order. I see them as Joseph Andrews, Turgenev's The Torrents of Spring, sometimes called Spring Freshets, depending on who is translating it, and Sherwood Anderson's Dark Laughter, which had really just been published. And it was indeed, I would say, the catalyst that got him sitting down and writing. Exactly at the same time, and we're talking here about winter, spring, summer, late 1925 and on into 1926. He is also simultaneously writing The Sun Also Rises. And I think a few of us here know what that means as far as his career goes. But first of all, let's look at some of the ramifications of that, because we have here, if we're looking from left to right, we have here three issues: techniques, themes, and motifs. And let's keep in mind all the time that Hemingway is living in Paris. He has been in Paris now for 4 years, well, off and on, because they were in Toronto in the middle when Bumby was born. But for most of all, they have been in Paris. And he really is at a point where he wants to show his prowess. He has had some materials published already, lowercase in our time, uppercase in our time, 3 stories and 10 poems, which was the first. And there is a buzz in the expatriate community in Paris about him. And there are people who are already expecting great things from him, especially Scott Fitzgerald, who has become his very, very close friend. And by this time, he also, the very short friendship that he had with Sherwood Anderson, which was used tremendously to his advantage. Let's remember that Sherwood Anderson provided, first of all, convinced him to take his new bride, Hadley, and instead of going to Italy, to go to Paris, and gave him instrumental letters, introductions to Gertrude Stein, Sylvia Beach, Ezra Pound. These are 3 big movers and shakers in the expatriate literary scene in Paris in the 1920s. And they have already seen the man. Gertrude Stein says of early Hemingway, he sucked all the air out of a room, which is not terribly flattering when you think of it. It's a bit frightening. It's a bit overwhelming. But nevertheless, Hemingway decides, I'm going to do no less than take on the establishment by showing them what I can do. And he does it really by writing a parody. Yes, he does really have a tremendous reaction to dark laughter. Dark laughter annoys the hell out of him. He is so annoyed at this poor writing, at this sloppy writing. And as we say, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Hemingway went on to survive. His work survived. He won the Nobel Prize. His name, even today around the world, is, you just say Hemingway, you just show the iconic photograph by Yusuf Karsh in the roll neck shirt, and everybody knows who he is instantaneously. And poor Sherwood Anderson has largely been forgotten. And so we see that he takes from Henry Fielding. First of all, if you have your copies, take them out, because I did point out to you that right from the opening page, and in every one of the 4 parts, there are quotes, and all it says is Henry Fielding. And I had to do a lot of detective work to discover that it is actually from the preface of Joseph Andrews. It's not actually from the novel itself, but just from the preface that Henry Fielding wrote, which is really a treatise on how to write. And all of these quotes really show us that Hemingway's Torrents is both comical and parodic. But what I do want you to see is, I did color them so you could see it, and that is, as far as motif goes, we have youth and innocence versus age and experience. And we have 2 female characters, Fanny, the young ingenue, who Joseph Andrews falls in love with, and Lady Booby, who is out to eat up this innocent young man, Joseph Andrews. When we also look at technique, we see the author who inserts himself right into the middle of everything is going on. You're in the middle of narrative, and all of a sudden the author says, "Hi, what do you think of this?" And Hemingway takes this, and the embedded tales. And of course, we know that there are a number of embedded tales. We have Scrip's tale, we have Diana's tale, Mandy has 2 tales, and Yogi's tale. And each one of them gives us insight into these characters. If we then go on to Turgeniev, and Turgeniev was, he borrowed from Sylvia Beach's lending library, and on his card, a number of years ago, I think we're going back 50 years ago, 40 years ago, one of the scholars, and forgive me for not remembering who it is at this moment, did a study of Hemingway's library cards from Sylvia Beach's Shakespeare and Company. And Turgeniev was very high on the list, and Constance Garnett was the translator then, which unfortunately I was unable to find, so I used a different translation. He borrows the title. This is fortunate and unfortunate. In one of his letters, when he was rather young, he does say that he stole from everyone, and he tried to cover it up so that people wouldn't notice that he was stealing ideas, words from others. Anybody who reads Dark Laughter, and it's a terrible thing to say, but Dark Laughter is a trial to read. It really is, sadly, not so well written, and but we will go on to that a bit later. You will come up with wholesale sentences that Hemingway simply lifts out, especially the recurring sentence, "Spring is coming." And this appears as it is in Dark Laughter, and Hemingway takes it. So as I say, notice that we have the motif from Henry Fielding of Youth and Innocence. And then if we drop down to Turgenev's Torrents of Spring, oh, we have the same thing again. We have the ingenue, the sweet young thing who is not misplaced, but replaced by the jaded, middle-aged woman. If we then go on to Sherwood Anderson, and I hope everybody noticed that Hemingway is saying, look, I'm taking on Henry Fielding, one of the great writers of the 18th century. Look, Ivan Turgeniev, who I'm not sure the American audience really knew about Turgenev. Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, yes. Turgenev has never been, at least as far as the Western world is concerned, has never been in the top of the Russian writers. But Torrents of Spring is certainly considered one of his major works. He also has Fathers and Sons. Here again, Hemingway takes it, one of his last Nick Adams stories, Fathers and Sons. So Hemingway is very, very appreciative of Ivan Turgenev. And here he takes the issue of the inability to commit to a woman. And lo and behold, when we get to Dark Laughter, to Sherwood Anderson, the same thing comes up, the inability to commit to a woman, which we see how both Scripps and Yogi are very, very introspective. Is this the woman? Can I hold her? I can't hold her. And the agonizing over sustaining any kind of relationship. Sherwood Anderson is very much given to this self-interrogation. Is this what I'm really thinking? And rhetorical questions such as Yogi or Scripps also asked when he arrives at Petoskey. After asking the telegraph operator, is this Petoskey? He then says to himself, is this Petoskey? So we have this, but in addition, there is an echo. And of course, when I was writing my dissertation, I almost took on Gertrude Stein too. And then I thought, wow, don't fall into that. That is just too much. But Gertrude Stein, like Sherwood Anderson, and she, of course, is a much finer writer, but once again, she really has fallen by the wayside with the international audience. The Making of Americans and Tender Buttons, and of course her amazing, the autobiography of Alice B. Toklas, uses the same self-interrogation, the rhetorical questions. And so we can see here that he is taking on a lot. And of course, it's only 90 pages. And of course, he wrote it very quickly. He claims, he meaning Hemingway, claims that he wrote it in 10 days. There's evidence that it was ongoing for a number of months, but it could be that if he added up all the hours that it came out to 10 days, 10 days meaning, would that be 240 hours? So maybe that I think one of the interesting motifs that we do get from Sherwood Anderson is, of course, he used the stereotyped, carefree, childlike African Americans, the happy African Americans, and Hemingway transforms them into Native Americans. Okay, motives. I think this is the big issue in Torrents, and that is, why on earth did Hemingway write this? Sun Also Rises, he realizes he's got a hell of a book here in The Sun Also Rises. Fitzgerald has really taken to it, has sold it to Maxwell Perkins at Scribner's, and Scribner's is eager to take on Hemingway and is willing to take on the Torrents of Spring in order to get to The Sun Also Rises. But I think that Hemingway, who was very successful in his high school parodies in the Oak Park High School Journal, where he was one of the major writers for their newspaper, he used to parody Ring Lardner quite a bit. And even in many of his letters, we also see this. And he does want to show up Anderson. By the way, in order to write a parody, you really need to know the mark, the one that you are parodying. You really need to know them well. And keeping in mind that Sherwood Anderson, at this point in time, the 1920s, is considered the leading writer in the United States. As I said last week, he had just won the very prestigious Dial Award for American Letters, a $1,000 prize, which in 1921 was a huge sum of money. I think we could say today it would be like winning $100,000. It was a huge sum of money. And again, perhaps it's pretentious to say, but if I had to make a generalization, Hemingway is showing that he can take on 18th century realism, 19th century romanticism, and bring in 20th century modernism. Paris is the 20th century, as Gertrude Stein told us. It's where the 20th century began. And Hemingway was right there where it was beginning and where it was happening. And he was with the most important writers, influential people, artists, rubbing elbows with no less Picasso. And of course, James Joyce, he and Jimmy famously went out drinking together. But again, and I want to give a lot of credit to one of the researchers, and this is Margaret Wright Cleveland, and she goes into very much the issue of race, which is so apparent in Sherwood Anderson's Dark Laughter, and of course in Hemingway's Torrents of Spring, and that is the absurdity, as she calls it, the absurdity of white privilege and superiority. And of course, he is here to snipe at Gertrude Stein. Gertrude Stein, after having made him, he now has turned and bitten the hand that fed him, as he has done with Sherwood Anderson. And sadly, years later, he would also turn around and do it to F. Scott Fitzgerald. It was a pattern in his life of picking up people, being very intimately involved with them, having an intellectual conversation with them, using them, and then dropping them when things didn't go exactly the way he wanted to. When I would say his huge ego, and perhaps I think many of us are aware that research has been done on Hemingway's manic depression. And during the composition of Sun Also Rises, as far as people, as we understand, he was on a very big high. And so also the end, the putting together in the end of Torrents of Spring also is part of this high that he undergoes. So he is also, he's doing a lot of things at the same time. And I think this is part of what contributes to the perhaps confusion and lack of gelling that we have in the Torrents of Spring. There is a definite feeling that this is not a complete work. So I'm going to just move this. I don't know if you see what I'm seeing, but I just want to get it out of the way. We know there are problems with torrents, and here are some of them that I saw. Some of the critics, and not just the critics, the immediate critics in the 1920s, I was able to find almost all of the critical articles and book reviews that were written about Torrents of Spring, and there were over 40 reviews, some of them very, very brief, 20 words, but some of them were 150 words, which is a nice size for a book review. And some of them knowing that he had taken on Dark Laughter, because Dark Laughter was the bestseller. Everybody was reading it, and they were reading it because there's a lot of sexual innuendo, which was obviously not so seen in writing in that time. And so it was a big bestseller, and people are very aware of what he's doing, and some found it very difficult to support him in this. Also, to read Torrance requires an effort. You have to think, oh, what is he doing with Joseph Andrews? What does he want me to do with these quotes? Why is he putting them there? And then to be aware of Turgeniev. Turgenev's Torrents of Spring is a very romantic novel. There's a lot of nature, and nature is very turbulent torrents of spring. These torrents are also of young love. When the hero, Sanin, falls in love with Gemma, the young man and the young woman, it's very, very romantic. And then, of course, he goes away and he meets an older woman and falls under her spell, and Gemma goes out of his head completely. But I don't know if you need to know it, but it does help. And of course, just after Torrance was written and published, not written, published, The Sun Also Rises comes out, and it is an overnight sensation. There were articles in New York newspapers about the youth of America is charging to Paris to speak like Lady Brett Ashley and to hang out in Le Dôme and Le Dumago and to run down and go to the fiesta. It was a real maker of that generation, the generation of the 20s, post-World War I. I'm going to say something which somebody might take me to task over, but all of these years, I started dealing with Torrance around 1992 is when I first found Torrance and made my decision to write my dissertation about it. And that is, and here I'm saying it, I think some of the critics and scholars didn't actually read Torrance. There, I said it. And most of them are not alive to say, no, Judy, I read it. Because they are too quick to join the naysayers and say, oh, what is he doing? He's, throwing rocks at poor Sherwood Anderson, and look what he's doing to Gertrude Stein. But I still think it was not read the way it should have been read. And then, of course, what happens if critics say, or critics don't mention it, if critics leave it out of a list of his collected works? So what am I, as the average reader, or even a Hemingway aficionado, a Hemingway supporter, a Hemingway lover? What am I supposed to do about it? Well, if they say it just ignore it, I guess I'll ignore it too. And I think that this compounded over the years the neglect of Torrents of Spring. Okay, well, there's no getting around it. There really is an elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is, of course, the issue of race. We can't get around it. The readers were very, very fascinated when Torrents of Spring came out. It was like, oh, look at all these innuendos, sexual innuendos. And it made it his only, really, Sherwood Anderson's only financial success. Take a look here at some of the quotes that I took out from Dark Laughter. Yes, the N word is here, and I'm not going to say it. It is certainly a sign of its times, and it's part of the way people wrote in those days. I'm not going to apologize because I'm not Sherwood Anderson. If he were here today, maybe he would make a different version, but mates swearing and hitting over the head with clubs, singing, dancing, toting loads on their heads, Women having babies, easy and free, half white, a lot of the babies. Oh, goody, goody, the issue of miscegenation, the mixing of races, is right here. And we have to know that Wright, the subtitle of Torrents of Spring, is a romantic novel in honor of the passing of a great race. And in 1916, a huge so-called scientific study had come out by a man named Grant Madison called The Passing of a Great Race. And it's talking about how white people are being overtaken by the dark hordes from Africa. And they were also worried about people from southern Italy, from the southern climes. And it was quite an important book at that time. People would recognize it right away. Here comes another quote. Right at the bottom of the slide. If you ain't never been loved by a brown skin, you ain't never been loved at all. And again, let's remember, people were very, very taken up with this. This was not the way people were writing. We have here these. The were something for Bruce to look at, think about. So many black men slowly growing brown. Soft voices laughing, laughing. Oh, my banjo dog. Oh, ho, my banjo dog. And I ain't gonna give you none of my jelly roll. Consciousness of brown men, brown women coming more and more into American life, by that token coming into him too. So there are so many sexual innuendos here that people were quite titillated by. And the final quote that I give, obviously it's throughout Dark Laughter, there was a shuffling sound. The older Negro woman tried to quiet the younger, blacker woman, but she kept laughing, the high, shrill laughter of the negress. I knowed it, all the time I knowed it, she cried, and the high, shrill laughter ran through the garden. I think this was one of the things that really got Hemingway's goat. And he, of course, replies, first of all, Bruce, the Negro bartender, has his laughter, but we get the Indian war whoops also. So Hemingway is definitely using this to his advantage in this. So why does Hemingway switch races? Sherwood Anderson is dealing with African Americans, and Hemingway decides to switch it to Native Americans. I think for most of us who are familiar with Hemingway's writings, it is quite clear that to him, he is familiar with the local Native Americans, having spent his summers, as we all know, in the area of Petoskey, Horton's Bay, at the family cottage in Windermere. Once Hemingway writes Torrents, he corresponds all the time with Sherwood Anderson, and he writes to him and he says, the great race I had in mind in the subtitle was the white race. And as far as I'm concerned, and again here, I'm basing myself on this very good article by Margaret Wright Cleveland, which was published in 2011 in Mid-America. And if anybody's interested, I could always send it to them. And she says Hemingway's intended major focus to be constructions of race to combat Anderson's sense of racial hierarchy. Anderson indeed sets his white characters as far superior to the African-American characters. The African-American characters, the happy natives who are very happy in their poverty, in their being subjected to the white race. And Hemingway had so much experience in dealing with the Indians. All we need to do is look at their frequent appearance as major characters in the Nick Adams stories, which many of you participated last year in reading. So let's also think, while Dark Laughter is being published in 1925, Hemingway's Higher Case, Uppercase in Our Time was also published. And it was published by Boni and Liveright, who is also publishing Dark Laughter. In other words, Sherwood Anderson was also instrumental in getting Hemingway to his own publisher. And in Our Time, I don't need to tell you, for instance, the vignettes include a huge number of different races and nationalities. And whereas Sherwood Anderson sticks to Middle America and doesn't do it very, very well, I have to say. I reread now in honor of this event. And again, Dark Laughter is hard to get through today. Maybe in the past, when there was the sexual innuendo, which one didn't find in other places, people would have plowed through it. I found it really difficult to get through this time, knowing that I really wanted to see again, what is it that Hemingway is taking Sherwood Anderson to task over? And there's an exchange of letters. Sherwood Anderson is very bewildered. He doesn't see Hemingway turning around and biting the hand that had fed him. And Hemingway, the young upstart that he is, and 20 years younger than Sherwood Anderson, does not hold his punches. And as we know, Hemingway also loved to use, to talk about punching people out, knocking them out, taking them on in a boxing match. And this is really what he does with Sherwood Anderson, who is quite bewildered over it. The 4 sections of Torrents of Spring, the first section is entitled Red and Black Laughter. Obviously, red, very frequently Native Americans in the past were referred to as redskins, and African Americans were at some point referred to as black. So we have here red and black laughter. Hemingway is definitely planning to switch Native Americans for the African Americans, and he knows them very, very well. The interactions with the Odwalla tribe, both his father, sometimes not very flatteringly, his father arguing with some of the natives who lived in the area, and they frequently appear. We can see, for instance, Anderson's use, in my third point here on this slide, Anderson's use of African-American laughter, how he makes fun of it in Torrents. So in Torrents, I put it in green so that you notice Bruce, the African-American bartender at the club, even though he is speaking in African-American dialect, understands people better than the white Yogi Johnson, who is really quite clueless. Yogi, poor Yogi, is really suffering from post-trauma, and he will tell his story really at the end of Torrents, and we finally get to understand that the so-called beautiful thing that happened to him in Paris was a horror once he found out that he was participating in a peep show. But Hemingway is parodying the name of Bruce Dudley, who is the main character in Sherwood Anderson's Dark Laughter. And he considers himself to be a very superior white person. So Hemingway does not bar his holds. He is ready to come out punching. We can also see white Yogi Johnson in Torrents wants to show how superior he is. There are 2 different kinds of Native Americans. There are the woods Native Americans who speak something, it seems comic then. Today, I think we kind of cringe. It's really a me Tarzan, you Jane kind of exchange of pidgin English. But when he wants to show them that he participated in World War I, and he says, I have an arm injury, all of a sudden he looks at one of these woods Native Americans who lost his arms and his legs. Let's say we know people who this did happen to them. Here, it's a kind of overkill on Hemingway's parts, but Yogi knows when he is defeated. So really, what do we want from Hemingway? He's 27 years old, and his second book is being published, and it got the result he wanted. Boni and Liveright, the way his contract had been set up with Boni and Liveright, when they published his uppercase In Our Times, they had the option on 3 more books, unless they refused to publish something, and then he could be released from his contract. F. Scott Fitzgerald had urged Maxwell Perkins to take on Hemingway, telling him that he had an amazing new novel that was ready to be published, referring to The Sun Also Rises. And Scribner's, anxious to get The Sun Also Rises, were willing to publish The Torrents of Spring. But the Torrents, so Torrents is published, as I said, 40 mostly positive reviews, but then Sun is published. And even if we take a look at the, here at the different cover art, the cover art of Torrents of Spring, if you remember, we have the 4 major characters. We have Yogi, Scripps, Diana, and Mandy, and it's a bit of a caricature, although I think it does very well show each of their personalities in a nutshell. But here we have The Sun Also Rises. We have a very provocative Art Nouveau. We have fruit at the top, an orange, an apple, ripe fruit. We have here a biblical quote. People would still know their Bible. We have here the sun, and on the background of the sun, we have a treeless, a leafless tree, and we have this maiden half undressed, showing a lot of leg, a lot of arm, very, very risque. And as I said, it was an overnight sensation. Fame became of him, as one of the biographies says. Once he became famous, he never looked back. And indeed, Hemingway is known worldwide as one of the writers who was able to make a living at his writing. So few writers are able to do that. Think of poor Captain Eliot, who so many people got up subscriptions so that he wouldn't, T.S. Eliot, so that he wouldn't have to work in a bank. People paid money to help him get out of the bank. Hemingway, once Sun was published, he was able to live off his writings. He continued to publish from time to time. He made a very good deal with Esquire in the 1930s to write articles from time to time. But Hemingway is an exception to the rule. He becomes famous. His larger-than-life personality continues this fame, and he doesn't look back. So 96 years after Torrents was published, how should we look at it again? It's just now been taken out of copyright. It's no longer under copyright. So what can we do with it? What should we do with it? Well, here is, in a nutshell, in a half a slide, my estimation. And that is, Hemingway wants to show what he's learned from all of the people he's been surrounded by for the last 5 years in Paris. Very much aware of James Joyce, of Ezra Pound, of being in the milieu of Gertrude Stein, Picasso, F. Scott Fitzgerald. These are the movers and shakers of early 20th century. This is modernism. And he wants to show them that he has been a good student. He is placing himself in the 20th century, embracing modernism, chaos that comes with modernism. He's also showing, I know how to write parody, because he's not just parodying Sherwood Anderson's Dark Laughter. while he's writing Torrents, he's really writing his great first novel, The Sun Also Rises. We have this generation post-World War I who saw the worst things happening to their generation, a whole generation of young men wiped out, especially in England. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Testament of Youth, Vera Brittain, one of the great personal, anguished writings. Vera Brittain, amazing. Testament of Youth. She writes a diary of the World War I years and how she sees her brother, her best friend, male friend, and her fiance all get killed, taken into this huge war machine of World War I. The Western world was exhausted. And here he writes this great book. He has his great character, Jake. He's making a little bit of fun of himself also. Carlos Baker, his first biographer, and the one who did the first collection of selected letters, which was all we had to deal with really until the huge project that's undertaken by University of Pennsylvania, Sandy Spanier, and many others who are contributing to the huge 8,000 letter 10 or 12 volumes that will eventually come out of all of the letters. Carlos Baker, the first one to put out the selected letters, says one needs to separate the funny business of Torrents from the great business of Sun. So he acknowledges they're happening at the same time, but notice that he sees both of them as business, the business of creating literature. So here's a good question for you. What is Hemingway's place? What is Torrents' place in the Hemingway canon? Again, remember I said it's left off the list sometimes. And even in this photograph that I downloaded from Google Images, it's not here. So, so what do we do with it? Is it an experiment? Is it an exercise, a student exercise saying, look, all of my teachers, all of my expat teachers, all these wonderful people who I have met in the last 5 years, is this an homage to what I have learned? Is it a success? Is Torrents a success? Well, now I'll show you. And I have this usually, this is my other copy. I usually have this copy in a little plastic sleeve with a note in English and Hebrew for my kids. My mother lived to be 96, and I have every plan on doing that. But just in case, it says this book is worth something because at the centennial, 1999, Janice, I think you were there, we all stood on the porch of the birthplace, the Hemingway birthplace in Oak Park. The Hemingway Society had invited a young man to play Dr. Ed Hemingway, who comes out on the porch, blows on a cornet, doo, 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 doo. It's a boy. And after all this ceremony, Hemingway's 3 sons and Marceline's 2 sons, the 2 cousins, John and Jim, came down off the porch, and I took out my copy and I said, will you sign this? And here it is. You can see it in the picture here. Notice, I'll show you right here, Greg. I read this when I was about 13 and thought it was hilarious. Greg Hemingway. Here's Patrick. Here is Jack Bumby. Here's Jim Sanford and John Sanford. Sadly, only Patrick is still with us, but this is a very treasured copy with their signatures. Of course, I have my list of what I used, but At my first Hemingway conference, I met the great, late Mike Reynolds. I have to tell you, it was the first time I had been at an international conference. And a day or two before the conference began, there he was on the street. He was already there. And I went up to him and I introduced myself. I said, Professor Reynolds, I'm Judy Henn from Tel Aviv University. And he did the most endearing thing. He did this and he said, who's that? I'm Mike. And he put his hand out and he shook my hand. And it was an amazing thing because he said later at the conference, when we were all assembled, he said this amazing sentence, I just realized that I've spent 30 years of my life studying 40 years of Hemingway's life. And I really have to say the same about myself. I don't have the kind of books that Mike Reynolds has. He was a treasured friend. I also want to quote Miriam Mandel, who my fellow traveler from Tel Aviv University. And she said, and I quote her, Hemingway people are good people. I now have actually ended my presentation and now want to open it to questions from you. Here, you've done your homework, good boys and girls, you read Torrents. So are you naysayers or yay-sayers? What say you?
We do have a couple notes in the chat real quick. Judy, if you get a chance to also put your contact information back in the chat for everyone. That would
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I really, really welcome a conversation with you because I think the jury is still out. 96 years. What do we say? What do we do with it? What do we do with this? Jan, I see you rolling your eyes.
Oh, you're muted.
You're muted. Unmute yourself.
Okay, a couple of things I've noticed. We know, those who are Michiganders or Michigese, that Native Americans still have trouble accepting this book. And I think there are some very good reasons for that, outside of the really obvious ones, like the woman who shows up stark naked except for her shoes, which are worn moccasins, and a papoose. Yes. Now, papoose has a couple of different meanings. One is that it's a baby, and the other is that it's a cradle board, which she would then be wearing. And usually the baby is inside the cradle board. So that kind of ambiguity says something. Then there's the bird. You know, as I wrote to you, giving someone the bird has a double meaning that, has to do with one's appendages, and it certainly has something to do with how Native Americans might view this book and view commentary such as that. I also noticed tonight the phrase jelly roll, which means essentially the same thing as the appendage used in the other.
Sexual innuendo is dripping out of both books, indeed.
Yes. And the choice of language, I think, shows us something about Hemingway's writing. We also know that Ernest tried different things, tried different structures with almost every work, so that this one is in 3 parts, like a 3-act play. A Pharaoh's Arms is in 5 parts, like a 5-act Shakespearean play. And I think it tells us something about his desire to experiment both with style and with structure through his entire career. No 2 books are built in the same manner, and the vocabulary in the different works matches the subject matter, so that in Green Hills of Africa and in True at First Sight, we get the African dialects of Nigeria and other African states. In his nonfiction, we get a different structure. And it just strikes me as being something about Hemingway that nobody really talks about very much.
I think that's fascinating, and I hadn't considered it either. And that's a great issue to bring up. The issue of structure. Really great. Okay. Other people, does somebody else want to make a comment? I think the issue of structure, that's fascinating, Janice. I really like that. Great. Hey,
Let's get
people.
people off.
I think people are in shock. Are you in shock?
I do love, Joan made a comment, the explication of Torrents is marvelous. So you've done a wonderful job of educating us. That's wonderful, Judy. I find it interesting. Again, I'm a Michigan nerd. So when you talk about Ring Lardner, he was from Michigan. And this, I'm a fan of his work as well. And so now I'm going to have to go and pull his stuff off my bookshelf, because I'm kind of now feeling in that genre, just kind of just get in that.
Yes, book, and this is the collected writings from Hemingway when he was writing for both the Oak Park High School newspaper and the literary journal. This was collected. It was actually published by the high school.
Oh, wow.
And here you can see Oak Park and River Forest High School is the publisher. And the introduction is, of course, Michael Reynolds. And it was published, here we can even see his high school photograph, Ernest's photograph. And it was published in 1993. So here is this excellent collection of his writings. And again, you can see it's only 10 years away from this. The seeds are there, definitely.
Mhm.
There's no doubt about it. So, I mean, you can, and here you'll be able to see how he uses Ring Lardner. And look what I had in here. I didn't even notice. This was issued at the centennial, and with the stamp, with the use of Karsh, and it's the centennial with the postmark. And I actually had it in the book, and I didn't even know. So, as I say, I assembled this as our background here. And I said to my husband, no more am I going to have one Hemingway book here and one here. I want everything together. They're not going to be here. They'll be in other places in the house, but I put them here for inspiration. Absolutely. I really liked, Janice, what you said about the different structure. One of the viewers did say they had trouble understanding you. I guess your connection isn't so good. So one of the issues that Janice brought up was, for instance, Torrents of Spring has 4 parts, and that some of the other novels too have different parts to them, that Hemingway is not only dealing with different types of language, he's also dealing with different types of structure. And right even to the end, we can see this. Sometimes it's more successful, sometimes it's less successful, but it's quite an interesting issue, which I never thought of. Not that I know everything, by far not. I'll also add that I have about 40 years of Hemingway reviews. I once I tried to convince both of Tel Aviv University, where I got my master's. I wrote about The Sun Also Rises, and University of Haifa, where I wrote my dissertation, my doctoral dissertation on Torrents. I wanted to give them my Hemingway collection. They said, no, I don't want it. So it's here, Any more questions, people? We have 3 minutes. As we say, the jury is still out. I am very happy that I took on, look, it had its results. When I found this book for the first time, just seeing on the spine Hemingway and thinking, I said this last time, is that Hemingway fellow that I've been writing about? Oh, it's the same guy. I never heard of this book. I know that for me, I made the right choice in choosing to devote my 250-page doctoral dissertation to the Torrents of Spring, because here you see 20 years later, I'm still the expert, which is great. I'm really enjoying that. I do want to urge people to return it to the list. It's part of them. It's part of the process. It's part of the skill set that he was working on. Janice, again, thank you for the idea of the parts. I'm going to start looking at all the novels now and seeing the parts. He was honing his profession as a writer, and this is part of that professional bag of tools that he is assembling for himself. He is not for nothing really one of the great American writers of the 20th century. And so let's put Torrents, both the dog-eared copy and my autographed copy, let's put it back on the bookshelf and not see it as a stepchild. And stepchildren today are not ignored either. We now know that they have a wonderful place in families, and let's put it back in the family of works by Hemingway.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Judy.
Judy, this has been so wonderful, Judy, getting to know you virtually across the world and bringing light to such an early and monumental work by Hemingway, one that we, at least living in Northern Michigan, is very special because of its local connections here. So thank you for being part of this celebration with us again.
It has been a great pleasure. It is now 3 o'clock in the morning.
Time for you to take off
my makeup, take off all this lovely clothing I put on, and get right back into bed. It has been such a joy to be together with you, to work with you. Diana, you've been absolutely with endless energy and putting together this event. I'm really looking forward to getting the links to it, because I have a number of friends in Israel who weren't about to get up at this time of the night to see it, and they will be very interested in seeing it. Thank you, all of you. Have you already put my information in the chat?
Can you do that again for us real quick?
Sure, I will do that right now. I'm going to put my email right now.
And this video will be it's streaming right now live on the Village of Walloon Lake's Facebook page, and we will keep that there, and then it'll be on our YouTube channel, and then we'll link it on the website. I know Leanne shared that from the Crooked Tree District Library. We want to thank them for their help in promoting this, as well as the Michigan Hemingway Society. So it has been wonderful. I appreciate everyone joining us, and feel free to watch again or share the link with others at a later date. So thank you all and have a great evening.
Thank you all, and we'll be seeing you. Thank you so much. It's been great.